Welcome, one and all, to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and it's especially a pleasure to be with my podcast partner, Stephen Tolbert. It's going to be a very fun episode here on this edition of the Hammer Territory Podcast, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. We are going to get into some pretty notable names in free agency that the Braves could target when it comes to position players, when it comes to hitters, and I think that there are going to be plenty of intriguing options that are going to be out there for us to discuss. Stephen, always a pleasure to be with you, ready to dive in to this really exciting topic. How's everything going for you on this holiday week?
Yeah, what's up, Shawn? It's always good to be on with you, man. Yeah, Thanksgiving week. We should start getting some action. Quite honestly, I'm surprised the Braves haven't added. Obviously, they've made a lot of news so far, but most of it has been clearing money and subtracting. I'm a little surprised they haven't added. Alex is usually pretty aggressive in November, but it could still happen. Baseball offices are still open technically for probably another couple days before they shut down for the holiday. But yeah, we've got some interesting names tonight. And if you look at Alex's history, trades versus free agents, typically prefers free agents just because obviously it's just money you're giving up versus money in prospects. So that does make sense. And when you're looking at targets, it's probably more beneficial to go over the free agent guys first than the trade guys, just because it is easier. It's just easier to hand out money versus handing out prospects. So yeah, we've got some interesting names to go over tonight as to some guys that could maybe be added to help this lineup.
Absolutely. And to your point, the Braves have been pretty busy so far this offseason, but it's been more about what they've been doing to clear payroll than it is adding potential pieces, which is a stark contrast from last year when the Braves seemed more than willing to add on money. And fellow a member of Foul Territory, the great Ken Rosenthal, wrote about that for The Athletic today, also discussed it on his show Fair Territory as well. What to make of the Braves dealing so far when it comes to this offseason. They clearly are looking to save money wherever they can. And some may see it as potentially cutting payroll, which if you want to call it that, that's perfectly fine. Ken Rosenthal talked about it. He mentioned that perhaps the Braves may be looking to miss the luxury tax this year after going into it for 2 straight seasons. I think that has some logic to it. But I think in addition to that, the other thing that stands out to me, Stephen, is that one of the reasons why the Braves have made some surprising moves to save money is because if you compare where they are now with their offseason plans versus 6 weeks ago, 2 big things stand out. 6 weeks ago, the thought was that Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna Jr. could be there at the start of the season for the Braves. Now they're not. 6 weeks ago, Raisel Iglesias and Joe Jimenez were a strength of this team. They were expected to be back as the back bullpen. Joe Jimenez potentially is going to miss the entire season. I get the idea of the luxury, being a reason why the Braves could be cutting payroll. But I also think a big reason for this is because the Braves now have more important needs to fill than they thought that they had, and they have even more needs in terms of quantity than they thought that they had. I think that may be a contributing reason as well as to why this Braves team is cutting payroll in the anticipation they're going to have to make many moves this offseason.
Yeah, and I do think that's more. I think that's more of the reason, quite honestly. If you just look at the numbers, you just look at the Braves payroll right now. They're at about 180 million on guaranteed contracts. Once you add in the pre-arbitration and the arbitration guys, it jumps up to about 195 million, 195 to 200, depending on how many pre-arb guys are on the team. Then you add in the player benefits. It's always about 17 million. I mean, luxury tax wise, the Braves are at about $217 million, depending on what you look at. And the first tier of the luxury tax is 241 for 2025. So, that means the Braves have about $25 million to spend before they get to that first luxury tax threshold. Again, depending on which one you look at. And that's not a lot of money considering all the things the Braves need to do. The Braves need a starter. They probably need a pretty decent starter. It's not just like a 5th starter. They probably need a guy that's closer to a 2, maybe a 3. We talked about, the Nathan Evaldis of the world who are going to command probably $20 million a year. And if you've only got $25 million to spend, then, that's pretty much your offseason. You're just going to go bargain shopping the rest of the way. And again, I've said it before. I don't think the Braves are doing that. I don't think getting under the luxury tax is the primary goal here. I think what you said is most important, is that the Braves just have needs, and they have needs at a level that they weren't quite expecting. They knew they were going to have to go get bullpen, but they probably weren't expecting to have to go get a high leverage reliever. That's probably going to cost quite a bit more. They knew they were going to have to get an outfielder, but they probably weren't expecting on having to get such a high quality outfielder because of the year Jared Kelenic had, and because we know Acuna is not going to be around on opening day, might not be around for the first half, the first quarter of the season, and so now they need a really good outfielder. It's not just the needs, but the quality of needs that they have, and the amount of money they're going to have to spend. I'm sure they did not want to decline Travis d'Arnaud's option. They love Travis d'Arnaud. You listen to Snit talk about Travis d'Arnaud, it's like he's talking about a family member. But needs popped up, and you got to do what you got to do. And I really think it's more about that. They have needs, and they have money they're having to spend that they weren't exactly expecting to have to spend. And so they had to clear money first to do it. And I think that's what this is. I said it on our last show. I don't think they're lowering payroll. I don't think they're just saving money just to save money. I think all of these moves are onto something, which is the next part of the offseason where we see how they build it back up. And that's, those are the moves we're waiting on.
Yeah, and the other thing to take away from Ken Rosenthal's piece, which was really in depth, he gave a lot of good, thought into what to make of the Braves off season so far, because it has been a bit different from what we've seen the Braves do in recent off seasons. But the other thing that stands out to me is that he mentioned that the Braves are going to look to be aggressive in the starting pitching market and potentially aggressive in the relief pitching market. What that stands out to me to say is this: is that for the second straight off season, the Braves really do feel that they are going to have to add a significant arm. So if you're talking about them potentially having $30 million right now to work with, if they want to stay under the luxury tax, and they've got those three big needs, you need to add a significant starting rotation. You add a significant pin arm, and you add a outfielder. The thing that stands out to me is that if they're going to be aggressive in the starting pitch market, that's where the majority of their money is going to go, like a Nathan Eovaldi or something like that, which means that they're either going to try to go bargain hunting or do a buy low candidate when it comes to a reliever or an outfielder. Before we get into these hitters, I kind of want to set that precedent. That's the thought that I had. What are your thoughts, Steven? It seems like that if there's going to be a significant move, it once again may be an arm by going to get a veteran starter in the free agent market.
Yeah, if you were handicapping this, I would say it's most likely the Braves spend the most of their, the highest portion of their payroll left on a starting pitcher. I think that's probably how I would handicap it at the moment. I think there's a better chance they go give Nathan Eovaldi $20 million a year than any of these outfielders $20 million a year. I think there's a better chance they go give, pick your kind of 2 number 3 starter quite a $15-20 million a year than, Willy Adama is $25 million a year. So yeah, if you're handicapping now, and we're going to go over these hitters because the Braves do need an outfielder. That's undeniable. But if you're asking me right now, where are they going to spend the most of their money, for the winter, I think it's going to be on a starting pitcher. And then they're going to have to spend another chunk of money on a relief pitcher unless they trade for somebody who doesn't make a ton of money, which is always possible. There are names out there. We talked about that with Duvall or Helsley, guys who, will cost you in prospects, but don't make a ton of money. And maybe that's a way you squeeze something in. But yeah, I would agree with that. Where we sit now, and pitching is just more expensive, quite honestly. Top end pitching is more expensive than pitching is the most expensive thing in baseball. So when you need a number 2 starter in free agency, you're going to pay a lot to do it. I mean, that's just the nature of it. You're just, Nathan Eovaldi is going to cost you $20 million a year. That's just the going rate. So yeah, I agree with that. I think it's most likely they spend big on a pitcher versus a hitter, but they are going to add hitters, at least one hitter, maybe multiple hitters. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're going to talk about some hitters.
So let's jump right into it. So the Braves, we know that we know that the shortstop position and left field, The Braves need to add some type of upgrade offensively when it comes to one of those two positions. It's much easier to add an outfielder than it is a shortstop who fits that description. The Braves need a left-handed hitting outfielder. They would probably prefer someone who's got a decent to good approach at the plate, a pretty good on-base percentage guy, doesn't strike out a lot, can hit for some power. Now, those boxes that I'm asking to check, that's going to cost some money. I don't think that the Braves are not in the market for Juan Soto, so we'll throw him out. Teoscar Hernandez, he's going likely back to the Dodgers. He's probably going to be too pricey. We'll throw him out. But let's start with some of these higher tier names, though, because the Braves could surprise people. Alex Anthopoulos has surprised at times, and he's willing to potentially go. If there is something that he's been open to doing, short-term contracts with 20 plus million average annual value, he may be looking to do that. And I don't necessarily know if these first few names we're going to talk about fit that bill. They may require a bit longer contract, but they're at least interesting to discuss. And of course, what I'm talking about, you're more talking about the level to start out with an Anthony Santander, maybe a Tyler O'Neill. I think that's kind of the second level of outfielders. Steven, what are your thoughts? The thing that stands out to me, power potential when it comes to those two hitters. And of course, we know the Braves, that's a very, very intriguing aspect for any hitter that they look to add.
Yeah, I mean, Santander is definitely, in that next tier of hitters. If you take Soto out, Soto is in a tier by himself, of course, and the Braves are not going to be on Juan Soto. But then that next tier of hitters is probably Teoscar Hernandez, Anthony Santander, and Tyler O'Neill. It's probably that group. And I agree with you. Teoscar's everything I've read. He's going back to LA. He loved LA. Obviously, they just won a World Series, and I think they're going to make him a priority. And he was a big part of that team. So I think Santander is the first guy. If you kind of rank them by best to worst, I think the Santander is the first guy you get to where the Braves could realistically sign him. And he's very interesting, right? He's a switch hitter. Again, it helps the Braves who need more balance in their lineup to have a guy who can hit lefty and hit lefty well. He's a switch hitter that does not have big splits. He hits both left-handers and right-handers very well. If you look at the last 3 seasons with Baltimore, he's gone nuclear the last 3 years. He got like a 125 or 130 WRC plus over his last 3 seasons with Baltimore. 105 home runs over 3 years. Obviously, you can do the math. It's about 35 home runs a year. He hit 44 last year. He's not a great defender, right? If you're going to do a knock on him, he's not a great defender. He's going to be a left field type for you for sure. But, Ozuna is going to be gone in a year, probably. I mean, I would guess. I don't think they're going to re-sign Ozuna. So if he has to play left field for a year and then switches to that DH role, it's not the end of the world.
Excellent point.
Yeah, and he's a masher. I mean, he's just a middle of the order masher, and he's a difference maker, right? He checks a lot of boxes, and again, he's a switch hitter, so he helps you on that side. Now, if you look at the money, if you look at like MLB trade rumors, the two I look at are MLB trade rumors and Fangraphs. Those are the two that have done it for the longest. It's kind of the two that I trust the most. But if you look at those two services, both of them have Santander at 4 years and 80 million. So 20 million a year. That's right at the level that the Braves keep their best players at. And that would obviously fit right in. Now, that would be the biggest free agent contract that Alex Anthopoulos has ever handed out. To date, the biggest contract he's ever handed out is the 4 years and 64 million that he gave Marcell Ozuna. And obviously this would be bigger than that. So that's notable. We got to say that. He doesn't typically hand out contracts this big. And it would cost I think that number is probably pretty right. I think that's going to end up being very close to what Santander gets. But that guy just checks a lot of boxes, and he's a force in the middle of the plate, both sides of the plate. Can hit lefty and can hit lefty pitching, can hit righty pitching. Tons of power, and you can move him over to DH once the outfield defense slips enough. So, out of that second tier, that's probably the most interesting guy to me. I don't know how you feel, Sean. I don't know if you're a Santander guy, if you prefer a guy like Tyler O'Neill, but looking at both of them, Tyler O'Neill is obviously a right-handed pitcher. He's also not a great defender. He doesn't is not the same level of hitter to me. To me, Tyler O'Neill is more of a lefty masher. If you look at his career, he's got pretty big career splits. Obviously, he's right-handed, so he's going to hit left-handed pitching better, but he hits left-handed pitching substantially better than he hits right. He's pretty much been a career average hitter as a against right-handed pitching for his career. So it's a much bigger platoon guy. He doesn't help you against right-handed pitching nearly as much as Santander does. So, if you're looking at that next tier of guys, I think Santander is the easy choice. $20 million a year, I think, is very doable. It's a reasonable contract for a guy who's going to sit in the middle of your order. Yeah. Out of that next tier below Soto, that's probably the first guy on my list.
I like Santander and I like Tyler O'Neill both. Tyler O'Neill, being, here in the Mid-South, having, being a little bit closer to the Cardinals, he was so tantalizing when he was on. He was injured a lot. I know that there have been some, disconnect when it comes to him and, for instance, the Cardinals organization. But the thing that I'll say is that Tyler O'Neill has always been intriguing. But here's my first thought when it comes to Santander as well as Tyler O'Neill. I don't want to pay them $3+ million, 3+ years and $20+ million when I feel that there are other hitters you can come and bring in on short-term contracts. I still believe in the Braves' ability to get more out of hitters here than they had in other places. I would rather go a bit cheaper and maximize a hitter's ability, especially a left-handed hitting outfielder, than pay premium price for a player like an O'Neill with his injury history and with his inconsistencies, or an Anthony Santander who may just be a DH after next year. So I think both are very intriguing names. I just don't know if they're the best value, which brings me to my next tier and the most exciting one, in my opinion. Alex Rosenthal, we need left-handed hitting. Ken Rosenthal mentioned that. We like power. We like familiarity. One of these names, Alex Anthopoulos, is already traded for. He knew him in LA. He brought him into Atlanta. We know how big of an impact this player made on and off the field when he was here. Of course, I'm talking about Jock Peterson. But Jock Peterson also has more familiarity than just Anthopoulos in the Braves organization now, because remember, we hired two executives. We hired two former front office staff from the San Francisco Giants and brought them into Atlanta. So they have familiarity with Jock Peterson. But another very intriguing name, and someone who I've always loved hitting at the plate when he's on, is Michael Conforto. So when I'm talking about guys you can bring in, when I'm talking about guys who could play left field, left-handed hitters who could probably do better here than they have in other places, and they have familiarity with in multiple ways, Michael Conforto and Jock Peterson, probably a bit shorter term contracts, probably around $15 million or less per year. Those, to me, potentially offer the best values to fit the needs that the Braves had. That's the tier I'm shopping on, Steven.
Yeah, Conforto's a guy that I've been trying to get the Braves to sign for like 3 years. One of my favorite players, quite honestly. Always undervalued. He's got like a 350 career on base percentage. He's just a really high plate discipline guy. He's always underperformed his expected numbers, in part because he's been in San Francisco last year, of course, and that's one of the best pitchers parks in the world, and certainly one of the worst hitters. And especially if you're a left-handed hitter, it's miserable place to hit. And Conforto's he's a high quality hitter. The guy I kind of compare Conforto to a little bit, although he is better defensively. Offensively, Conforto reminds me a lot of Kyle Schwarber. He's a guy that is such a good hitter and so good at plate discipline that he could actually bat leadoff for you. He takes so many walks. He has great command of the zone, but he also has serious power. He just reminds me a lot of Schwarber, and he's a better defender than Schwarber. He's younger than Schwarber. He could still play left. He's not a great defender by any means. I'm not going to say that. I would say he's average to below average. But again, you've got that DH spot opening up after 2025, most likely with Ozuna leaving. He didn't have a huge year last year with San Francisco, but again, his expected numbers were much higher than his actual numbers, and that's arguably the worst hitters park in baseball is that park in San Francisco. So you get him in Truist, where left-handed hitters can really eat. Michael Conforto just solves a lot of problems for you. He solves the top of your lineup. again, you could bat him leadoff. You really could. You know, when Acuna's not there, you could bat him leadoff. He's that good. He's got that much plate discipline. Again, he's got like a 350 career on base percentage. If you look at the contract is very appealing. Fangraphs has him at a 1 year, $12 million prediction. MLB Trade Rumors has him at a 2 year, $18 million prediction, I think is right. Again, that's very appealing. You know, it saves money, especially if you're going to have to go big with the starter, like we both think they're going to do. You know, if you can get Conforto for a 1 year 12 or 2 year 18, that's a ton of value. And again, I think he's a guy that can sit at the top of your order, could even sit in the middle of your order if Acuna's there. Just checks a lot of boxes. You know, the problem with Jock is that he hasn't played defense. You know, it's going to be another Jorge Soler situation. He DH'd exclusively last year with Arizona. I love Jock, of course. We all love Jock. And he had a monster year. He had a monster year for Arizona. He had like Marcell Ozuna level offensive year for Arizona last year. I'm not sure how many people know that, but where do you play him becomes a serious question. And if you're going to have another DH on the lineup, then, you know, people are going to say, why didn't you just keep Soler? So I do love Jock. I don't know where you'd play him. Conforto, you can play in left. And you could even probably play in right field, considering how small right field is in Truist Park. And then he wouldn't kill you. He's much better than Soler in right field, I can tell you that. So yeah, my favorite guy on this list by far, and he's been my favorite guy for probably 2 or 3 years now, is Michael Conforto. That's the guy I want the Braves to sign. That's the guy that I think can help the Braves at the top of the order. Big walk rate, you know, commands the zone, good power, good on base percentage, low contract, you know, not a ton of commitment. Just makes a ton of sense. I think he could be your version of Kyle Schwarber, and I think the Braves desperately need that. It's clear when Acuna's not in there how much they struggle with on base. We've talked about it ad nauseum. They need more on base. They need more plate discipline. They need more left-handed hitting. Conforto checks all those boxes.
So take this with a grain of salt, because I don't put too much emphasis on this, but you know, Baseball Reference, Stephen, has that. It's always fun to look at this. They have that similarity, a batter metric or whatever it is. I don't know all the details of it, but it's always fun to see who these players are most compared to. The second most comparable player in terms of his career arc for Michael Conforto is Jorge Soler. The most comparable player for Jorge Soler in terms of his career arc is Michael Conforto. And Jock Peterson is listed on those lists for both of those players, and both those players are listed on the list for Jock Peterson. You have very similar type of skill sets. But here's the big key, in my opinion. You have left-handed hitting approaches that can do damage against right-handed pitching. I think an underrated part of Jorge Soler's overall game, he does very well against right-handed pitching. I love Jorge Soler as the hitter. You just couldn't manage it when it comes to the outfielder. And that's why I think Michael Conforto, in my opinion, if you could get him at 2 years, $30 million, whatever it may be, maybe you could sign him for $10 million this year, $20 million, you know, in year 2, you know, and give him a little bit of the pie that's left by Ozuna moving forward. Those are the type of things that you could potentially do. If Michael Conforto is a Brave at the end of this offseason, that alone to me has put us in a very good position for this to be a successful offseason. I agree with you, Stephen. I think that he would be a great addition. And if we could unlock his potential, it could be a lot of fun. Which brings me to my next tier of hitters. And I bring up these hitters potentially as bounce back candidates. These are more hitters who I think over, you know, the past couple of years, probably their names have been a bit better than their actual values, because a few years ago they had an intriguing, you know, year or two, and they just not been able to live up to it until then. One is Alex Verdugo, who's a left-handed hitter. I think he's probably in recent years, he's been more defense than offense in terms of value, and even that has kind of taken a step back. The way that his numbers has regressed is not too encouraging. I put him kind of on the back burner. But if there was another outfielder who to me would be very, very intriguing, if you were to tell me this player is going to be an Atlanta Brave by the end of the offseason, I would get very excited very quickly. His name is Max Kepler, former outfielder for the Minnesota Twins, someone who's always had some very intriguing offensive potential, kind of an underperformer throughout his career, been down this past year, But those level of guys, Stephen, if for some reason we just did not have the money to go get a Conforto or a Peterson, that level probably makes sense for the Braves to shop at as well. Your thoughts or anybody else you want to add to that level of potential bounce back candidates that the Braves could once again work their magic with?
Yeah, Kepler is definitely that guy. Like Kepler is definitely the buy low, work with him. He had a down year in 24, but the year before that he was very good. Kepler's been around forever. We were talking before the show, but in my mind, Max Kepler is like 27. But that guy debuted in like 2015. Max Kepler is like 32 years old at this point. And so, that's part of it. But he's going to be very cheap. He's a really good defender, especially somebody on the wrong side of 30. Outfield defense is usually a young man's game. Normally, when you get past 30, your defense just falls off the mountain. But he's a very good defender. He does hit right-handed pitching well for his career. He's not terrible against lefties either. Actually, he's been a pretty solid hitter all the way around. But he just didn't have a great year in 24. And so, that stinks for him in terms of timing, of course, as he's hitting the free agent market. There was actually talk last year that the Braves might trade for Max Kepler just because, before they did the Celtic move, we were kind of in the same spot where they needed a left-handed left fielder. Obviously, Kepler had 1 year of team control left with the Twins. That made a lot of sense at the time. Kepler was coming off a much better season in 2023, so it made more sense. Obviously, in 2024, he just didn't have a great year. But expected numbers are still decent. Left-handed, again, there's a theme. I think the Braves desperately need another left-handed hitter. Santander, Conforto, Kepler. I think any of them would help. But Kepler is definitely your buy low. If you go big on a starter, you go big on a reliever, you don't have a ton of money left. You want to get some upside, but you don't want to spend a lot of money. Kepler is going to be one of those. Kepler's not in the top 50 free agents on either site, so he doesn't have a contract prediction. But my guess is Kepler's going to sign like a 1 year, $5 million contract, 1 year, $4 million, kind of something like Adam Duvall signed last year. He's going to have to wait in line. He's going to have to wait for all these other guys to sign before anybody kind of comes calling. If it goes really bad for him, it could be a minor league deal. I don't see that. I think he's got more upside than that, but it would be a very cheap move. It would be very inexpensive. If you've got other stuff you got to do and you just don't have a lot of money left, then you could do worse than Max Kepler. But yeah, out of that group, he's probably the most interesting to me just because he does have track record. He's got some interesting profile stuff, batted ball stuff, expected numbers. So yeah, that's the if you're looking for the bargain bin with upside play, it's probably Max Kepler.
So then let's stay in that bargain bin because I do agree with you. Out of all these names, I'm going to be honest with you. Conforto's one, Max Kepler's two. Those are the guys that, to me, check those boxes that also allow for you to go get that significant arm that you're looking for. But let's say the Braves just go completely a different route than we expect. We've continued to hear from multiple sources that the Braves have some level of interest in shortstop Willy Adames. Now, the thing is that half of baseball, rightfully so, has interest in Willy Adames. Willy Adames is likely going to get a Dansby Swanson level contract, if not a bit more. I don't expect for the Braves to go get Willy Adames, but him, Ha-Seong Kim, formerly of the Padres, is another really fun name. Another guy who could be a bounce back candidate. Another guy if we could bring in and could have a successful year here. Could we work out an extension with him and keep him here long term? That would be a lot of fun. Stephen, the intrigue of potentially getting that level of shortstop talent is certainly out there. Your thoughts on that? Probably not worth talking about that much because I just don't see it happening. But at the very least, you could see the logic behind the Braves going to do it if they can find the right deal.
Yeah, I mean, they need a shortstop. So just on that alone, you would say, well, we got to talk about shortstops because they need a shortstop. Orlando Arcia is a bench piece. He's paid like a bench piece. He accepted a bench piece contract because that's what he is. And, the entire argument for starting Orlando Arcia is, well, let's just make the other 8 hitters in the lineup so good that you can bat him ninth and it's not going to hurt you. Like that's the best argument for him is build up everybody else and then you can live with him at 9. That's not a great argument, of course, for an individual player. Basically, he sucks so bad that we have to build up the other 8 guys to swallow it. So they need a shortstop, and Willy Adames is the best, probably the best outside of Soto. Soto's the best hitter on the market, but after Soto, it's probably Willy Adames. Is probably going to get the second biggest position player contract in this free agent market. He's very good. He's an all-star level shortstop. It's going to be very expensive. We're talking, you're talking 9-figure contract. You're talking in the hundreds of millions. You're probably talking, my guess is he signs very similar to Dansby. I think he's actually a better value than Dansby, though, because Dansby's value was so tied into defense, and defense does not age well typically. Adames is more of an offensive hitter. I mean, I'm more of an offensive prospect. You're counting on offense more with Adames, which means you can trust it a little more, in my opinion. I think he's probably going to get like 180 million, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. It's going to be very, very expensive. It's going to be 25, 26, $27 million a year, most likely. I just don't know if the Braves can stomach that when starting pitching is such a big deal and such a big need and so expensive on the free agent market. Now, if they get lucky and they get some sort of trade, if they get somebody that's really good that doesn't make a lot of money, then that's something you can do, right? Like if you use, let's just throw a crazy scenario out there. Let's say you use Drake Baldwin. Let's say it's a Garrett Crochet, Drake Baldwin trade of some sort, right? Where you get a really good pitcher that doesn't make a lot of money, right? If you've solved that need without spending the money, then you can probably shop in that aisle for shortstop because you don't have to for pitcher. But if you're going to solve your starting pitching problem through free agency, I just don't know if you can be in the Willy Adames market too. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would have to see it to believe it, quite honestly. If they didn't have such a big need at starter, if they didn't have this Joe Jimenez injury, maybe it can happen. But with those being the reality, again, unless you're going to trade for a guy who's a really good starter, doesn't make a lot of money, I just don't buy it. I don't buy it yet. And again, you're going to be competing with some very big team. I mean, the Dodgers are interested in Adames. The Mets are interested. The Red Sox are interested. Like these teams can write checks that you probably can't. So, that matters here. So I would be very surprised if it happened. My guess is if it did happen, it's because the Braves have figured out starting pitcher somewhere else outside of the free agent market and got a solution that way. But we'll see. I could be wrong. I mean, they could sign Adames tomorrow for all I know. But my guess is they're going to go big on starter, go medium on left field, and then try to trade for somebody who's a high leverage reliever who doesn't make a lot of money. Like if you ask me, Steven, how are they going to allocate all these resources? I think they're going to go spend 20 million plus on a starter like Eovaldi. I think they're going to try to get a guy like Conforto for 10 million a year, 12 million a year, maybe 15. And then I think they're going to try to trade for a reliever who doesn't make a ton of money, maybe like 6-7 million. And allocate the resources that way. I think they'll probably still be above the luxury tax, but not into the second tier. And payroll will be, around 240 million, something like that. But I could be dead wrong on all of that. That's just my prediction. That's my guess. But, they're going to add offense. They're going to add a hitter of some regard. I can promise you that. Now we just got to find out who it's going to be.
So then let's as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, let's have a bit of fun. Say they go the route of trading for signing a big shortstop. They just don't have a lot of money to go get that type of outfielder. And that's what Ken Rosenthal kind of alluded to, the Braves kind of waiting, to see if they can find a name that could be a bargain. There's a couple of other left-handed names out there that are intriguing to me. And Steven, in general, I'll structure this question as to who stands out to you as an intriguing bargain basement type outfielder. One to me is Jesse Winker. I continue to feel that Jesse Winker would be a fun addition to this lineup. Now, there's a couple of things. Jesse Winker is a statue out in the outfield, and he also is not the most well thought of clubhouse presence when it comes to baseball. And I think the Braves, are going to value both of those things. Which brings me to a player that we discussed at the trade deadline. an old friend who, if he came back to Atlanta, I would be more than happy to see happen if we made the significant moves elsewhere. That is Jason Hayward, who had a bit of a bounce back year last year as well. Thoughts on those names or any other names that you feel stand out as being that quote unquote bargain, if we went bargain shopping, that level of outfielder that you think could be a good value signing for the Braves?
Hayward's a good one. High character, high clubhouse guy. Still got some pop, can hit right-handed pitching, can take walks. That's not a bad one. Outside of just the nostalgia of it, I don't really care about that. But just on the field, it doesn't make sense. Brian De La Cruz has always been a guy that has some traits that Alex likes. Hits the ball hard, has good expected numbers. Did have he got traded to Pittsburgh midseason and just fell off a mountain. I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if he was hurt or what, but I mean, he had a miserable second half of the year that's going to tank his value. And so he's going to be very cheap, but always a guy that we've liked. Dylan Carlson, another guy that's a ton of potential, ton of pedigree. Had some interesting years with St. Louis, got traded to Tampa. Again, fell off a mountain. I'm not sure what happened in 24 to Dylan Carlson, but it's going to, it's going to end up costing him a lot of money because he's going to be very cheap on the free agent market this winter. But that's another guy that I wouldn't be stunned if they took a flyer on. There's definitely some interesting names. I do want them to aim higher, of course, to start with. But yeah, if you get to that point where you need a guy like that you could, with these deals, all you're looking for is a twinkle of upside. That's all you're, it's a lottery ticket. Is there anything I can bank on? Is there anything I can wish on, hope on? And all of these guys have something that if you get it to click, have some potential. Kelnick is in that same boat. Kelnick's got talent. He's got pedigree. He's got potential. But he's never been able to put it together. So, you've got a guy on your own roster that probably fits that category too. But yeah, I want them to aim higher. Of course, I want Conforto. That's the guy I want. I've wanted Conforto for 3 years now. I just think he could be their Kyle Schwarber. And I personally put a ton of value in having more on base on the team. I think they've sacrificed too much on base for slugging. And last year when the homers weren't there, it was evident that they've sacrificed too much on base for slugging. And I think they need to get back to some on base. And Conforto is just an on base guy. And that's what I want. And he's left-handed, which is also what I want. So I hope they get Conforto. If we're taking in if we don't care about contract, then give me Santander. But he's going to make $20+ million a year, and you still got to add a starter. So if you add in contract expectations, I want Conforto. I think he checks every box, and I think he makes a ton of sense for you because you can still do everything else on your wish list. But we'll see what they do. It's going to be interesting. Plenty of names out there, and none of them have signed. So every option is still on the table. Trade options we've talked about before, but yeah, out of all the names we talked about tonight, Conforto is definitely the guy I want.
So, Stephen, I think I'm going to start a new tradition with you, off-season tradition only. I'm going to end each of our episodes with a fun question that I think that the masses will enjoy your answer on. So, Stephen Tolbert, you are on the clock. Who has the prettiest of any left-handed hitting outfielder that has ever put on a Braves uniform?
Sorry, you were breaking up. What was the question?
No issue at all. Of all the Braves outfielders that have hit left-handed in franchise history, who has the prettiest swing?
Oh, prettiest swing. Left-handed outfielders that have pretty swings. David Justice had a. It wasn't quite like Griffey, but it wasn't far away from Griffey. It was a very sweepy, kind of upright swing. I think David Justice would have to be one on my list. Freddie had such an ugly swing, quite honestly. It was like he was always trying to hit the ball to left.
Outfielder.
Oh, outfielder. I'm sorry. Outfielder. Okay. Well, then David Justice obviously played right field. David Justice would be one. Trying to give you another name if I can think of one real quick. Ryan Klesko had a really violent swing. I I don't think
Schwarber
that.
before Schwarber. Schwarber before Schwarber without the
Yeah.
offense. Schwarber before Schwarber.
Klesko, I mean, he was just a masher. I mean, I don't think there was nothing about Klesko's game that was pretty. It was just violent.
If there was, and I know that Tom Glavine is recognized for his hockey background, but if there was ever a left-handed hitter that took a hockey slap shot approach to hitting a baseball, it was Ryan freaking Klesko. That was the answer I was looking for.
Do you know who has? Everybody thinks the answer to this is Griffey, but do you know who has the prettiest left-handed swing of any outfielder ever? In my opinion, it's not Griffey.
All right,
Carlos Gonzalez of the
Yes.
Rocky. Go look up, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go look at Carlos Gonzalez highlights with the Rockies and tell me that is not the prettiest swing you've ever seen. It was like it was just like butter.
Well, so it was kind of like Freddie's, right? Like Carlos Gonzalez's swing, like the vertical, like the sweeping of the bat in a vertical sense. Versus, Griffey's was more sweeping through the zone, but Carlos Gonzalez's ability to lift those low balls in Colorado, I agree with you. Carlos Gonzalez has one of the prettiest swings I've ever seen. He was, if you want to,
and there's something about it. I don't know why, but there's something about left-handed swings are just better looking than. I don't know why, but left-handed swings are just better looking than right-handed swings.
If you want to talk about a player who, when he was on, Juan Soto, like he was at a Juan Soto level.
He was a superstar. Yeah.
He was.
Yeah. I don't know what he fell off a mountain quick. I don't know. Playing in altitude has they've done all sorts of research about, everybody thinks playing at altitude is an advantage, but there's been all sorts of research about how much of a disadvantage you are anytime you're on the road because of how drastic it changes your body. And I don't think these guys age particularly well either. Nolan Arenado is going through that right now. But yeah, Cargo was my favorite swing of all time. Admittedly, I wasn't old enough to really appreciate Griffey, but for the guys I was old enough to appreciate, Cargo had the prettiest swing I've ever seen.
And if I remember correctly, I think he became a Rocky because the A's traded him
for Matt Holliday.
And then he wound up signing with the Cardinals. But hey, that was a great move for the Rockies. Not so good for the A's. And of course, the Braves know, when the A's make not so good decision when it comes to trades. Right. Hey, but the reason I ask these questions, Stephen, it always is a good way to end these episodes because it leads to even more fun conversation. Stephen, do you have anything else for us as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
No, just happy Thanksgiving to everybody, of course. I think we're going to do a show. I think we have a show planned for Friday. I think it's Brad and Scott maybe doing a mailbag
show.
I'll be out of town, but obviously if anything breaks, we'll get some content out of some sort. I don't expect anything to break in the next couple of days, but that's exactly when stuff breaks, is when you least expect it, especially with Alex. So whatever happens, we'll be on top of it one way or another. But if we don't, obviously everybody have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys, next week at some point.
Until next time, we'll talk to you again soon. For Stephen, you can find him at B_Outliers, myself at StatsSAC. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.